Eared grebes and horned grebes. These look pretty distinct, don't they? Well, let's try something. Not so distinct now. These birds in non-breeding plumage are very difficult to tell apart, but throughout this video, I'll give you tips on how to do so. Let's dive in. Like I mentioned before, both birds in breeding plumage are pretty easy to tell apart from one another. Eared grebes have very wispy, golden, macaroni-like feathers on their face, while horned grebes have a uniform, straight yellow line that looks totally solid. But when we swap it over to non-breeding plumage, these birds are much more difficult to tell apart. But let's start with the basics real quick. We're gonna focus first on the bill. Horned grebes have a white tip on the end of their bill, while eared grebes have an all dark bill with a dark tip on the end of the bill. This is very difficult to see out in the field, especially if you're looking at these birds from a long distance a ways away. So let's focus on some other ID tips real quick. Let's move on to their cheeks. Horned grebes have a very clean white cheek. There's like a solid straight line between the dark on its cap and its white cheek on its face. Eared grebes, on the other hand, have a very dusky white cheek that looks like it has some dark dust drizzled in there with the white, so it's a lot more messy. And then the peak of their heads. Horned grebes' peak is on the back of their head, while eared grebes' peak is on the front of its head just above the eye. This isn't always obvious in the field, so don't lean on this ID point alone. And then a few other things that aren't as easy to tell in the field, but could help you if you have one of these other things down. Horned grebes have a very thick neck compared to the eared grebe that has a very thin neck. This is really difficult to tell though unless you have the two birds next to each other to tell them apart. Now let me preface this by saying that a lot of times eared grebes and horned grebes will be in the same flocks, so you'll have a comparison there, but if they're alone, this is hard to tell in the field. And then eared grebes will have a smaller, thinner bill than the horned grebe, but again, if you don't have anything to compare it to, you might not be able to tell the difference in the field. One more warning as well, eared grebes in their first fall plumage, so the first year of their life in the fall, do have cleaner white cheeks that does trip some people up. So pay attention to the neck. Horned grebes have a very white, clean neck, while eared grebes have a very dusky, messy neck. All right, so we got the physical traits out of the way. Let's move on to the calls. Now these aren't going to be much help at all because eared and horned grebes really only call during the breeding season when they're super far north on those northern lakes. So unless you live in some of those areas, their calls aren't going to help you distinguish them from each other. During the non-breeding season and in the winter, they rarely make a sound at all. But I'm going to show you the calls anyway. Here's the call of the horned grebe. And here's the call of the eared grebe. Let's move on to their ranges. Both birds cover the entirety of the United States, but they differ on the northern end of their range and the southern end of their range. For example, the horned grebe goes super far north into most of Canada and covers Alaska, while the eared grebe only bleeds a little bit into Canada and doesn't even go as far north as Alaska. Now on the south, eared grebes actually drop way further south than horned grebes do, and they go all the way into Mexico, while horned grebes tend to actually stop right on the US-Mexico border. You're not going to get much help from habitat differences either because they share almost the exact same habitats. In fact, they share the same habitats. Both birds breed on ponds with a lot of vegetation submerged in the water, and in the winter they will both be found on the coasts, east and west coast, and in large open lakes as well if you live inland. There are a little bit of differences in behavior, but again, this is not going to be super helpful. They really are very similar species. Almost the entire eared grebe population ends up at two lakes in the United States when they're migrating south in the fall. Mono Lake in California and the Great Salt Lake, my home lake, in Utah. Hundreds of thousands of these birds will arrive on these lakes in large numbers, and occasionally you'll actually find horned grebes mixed in there as well. Eared grebes are also the most abundant grebe in the entire world, whereas horned grebes definitely have sizable populations, but they're not as large in number. Horned grebes are best found in North America during their migration season, and this happens in April and October. So if you're looking for a horned grebe and you don't live in their breeding or their wintering areas, go out and check your local lakes, or if you live on the coast, check the coast and you might find these birds moving through. For me living in Utah, eared grebes are much easier to find. When they're passing through in the fall, there's hundreds of thousands of them at a time on the Great Salt Lake. So I actually spend a lot of time scanning through these large groups of grebes to try to pick out the 1 or 2 horned grebes in the group that I can find. Now, remember the most important tip to distinguishing these two birds. Remember that horned grebes are clean. They have clean lines, they have a lot more white on their neck and in their cheeks, and that cap line is a lot more clean, whereas eared grebes are a lot more messy. They have a lot more dusting on their necks, a lot more dusting on their cheeks, and overall they're just a messier, dustier bird than the horned grebe. Also, just a rule of thumb, make sure you eliminate the most common bird in your area before you move on to IDing the rarer bird in your area. So for example, eared grebe is much more common for me in the state of Utah, so I have to eliminate eared grebe before I even let myself consider horned grebe. This isn't hard to do, you just go through the motions like I pointed out. You want to look at their beak color, then you want to look at their cheeks, then you want to look at their neck, and if all of those things don't indicate eared grebe, then you can consider horned grebe and look a little bit closer. But some of you, again, will have horned grebe more common in your areas, so you'll be looking to eliminate that one before moving on to eared grebe. I think you have the basics down, so let's send it over to the bright-eyed birding woodpecker to give you a quick quiz. Now you have the foundations to identify and distinguish these two very similar grebe species. Remember to check out Bright-Eyed Birding, where I take you on birding adventures once per week and we find some of these birds in the field. If you'd like to support the channel, check out my membership program, link will be in the description below, or the merch where my sister made some incredible artwork for these shirts, hats, mugs, whatever you want. Check out those links. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Bright-Eyed Birding Learn.